Robert, this is the Global Digest think tank group. Why don't you briefly introduce yourself and your background to our audience, please?
Very good, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Robert D. Eldridge. I am a U.S. citizen currently based in Taiwan. I've lived in Japan actually for the past 34 years. I'm a PhD holder in political science. My specialty is Japanese political and diplomatic history. Within that, I focus on Japan's relations with my country, with the United States, primarily in the post-war period through today. August 15th is the 79th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. So for Japan, as well as other countries that were affected by the Pacific War, it's an important special day. And I've published many books, articles, think pieces on Japan, U.S.-Japan relations, the region, Taiwan, and I will continue to be in Taiwan until the end of this year. I have a one-year fellowship to study about Taiwan's politics and foreign policy.
As you mentioned, today, August 15 is, you can say, Japanese surrender today. And it's mean a lot of Japanese colonized countries, they are free, independent today, including
Correct.
South Korea. In South Korea, I see they are celebrating today as Liberation Day. So it means Japan already give up colonization and they surrender after nuclear bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So how did you understand more about August 15 in American opinion, and also you live in Japan? How's Japanese feeling in this August 15? Can you explain us more?
Thank you. That's a great question. So being from the United States and growing up in the United States, I was very much influenced by Western literature about world history and in particular World War II. So moving to Japan in 1990 opened my eyes about a lot of different things, not only about Japan, but also about how I was raised and educated, and how the portrayal of history, differs from country to country or region to region. So I'm still heavily influenced, I think, by Western, writing and reporting and thinking. But over the past 3 decades, I've made an effort to understand the Japanese perspective on many issues, including Japan's perspective on World War II, how, as you mentioned, many in Japan, as well as many throughout the region, look at the Pacific War as an opportunity to liberate, those colonies, those regions from, Western control, and so that understanding that perspective, both from the local perspective as well as the Japanese perspective, has been very, very interesting. So I try to be a bridge between that perspective in Japan. So it tends to be more the conservative or the rightist perspective, and those in other countries that maybe criticize that perspective and call it as revisionist or nationalist. And so I have very good connections with people on both sides of the debate, particularly on the conservative side in Japan. And so trying to better understand their perspectives has been very, very exciting and meaningful.
Can you say current leading government party, Liberal Democratic Party, that is conservative or they are not conservative? How do you see that?
So within Japan, the government is actually a coalition government right now. And they've been a coalition government for a little more than 20 years. So the main party in the two-party coalition government is called the Liberal Democratic Party. They were formed in 1955. And for most of the post-war period, including today, they were the governing party. And that doesn't mean that there wasn't an opposition party. And in fact, there were many, many opposition parties. But the opposition parties tended to be smaller, less well-funded, and divided among themselves. So the Liberal Democratic Party was able to basically control, the political space for decades and decades.
Right.
They are considered conservative, and when they were founded as a sort of a break or a dam blocking the shift towards the left in post-war Japan in the early post-war period. So the business community in Japan pressured the two conservative parties to come together. One was the Liberal Party, and one was the Democratic Party. It brought those two together to make the Liberal Democratic Party. And
their party name is Liberal Democratic Party, but they are conservative.
yeah, well, liberal, can be defined in a number of ways. They're the old school liberal. In other words, slightly, conservative, pro-business, pro free speech, things like that. So the kind of the idea that you would have of a liberal many decades ago.
Which means conservative can be also liberal.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So the current, I think, context or definition of liberals greatly changed, and particularly in the United States, but we'll leave that aside. And then in the coalition government, there's a second smaller party, and they are a Buddhist leaning party, and they are quite pacifist, and they tend to be a break on the main ruling party when that party is exploring a more robust foreign policy or security policy. And so they're considered the more centrist or leftist within the coalition government. Okay, so overall, they tend to be more conservative than most of the other opposition parties. But even within the ruling party, there are conservatives, and then there are more leftist or liberal leaning. within them.
Yes.
And quite often, the main ruling party, the Liberal Democratic Party, is called a party of smaller parties because they have factions, long historical factions within the ruling party. And each of those factions almost acts like an independent party. So yesterday, for example, the current Prime Minister, Mr. Fumio Kishida, he announced that he was not running for re-election as the party president,
Right.
which means there's going to be an election coming up, both for the party president, but also for the general, voters, opportunities for the general voters to vote at some point. And at that time, all or most of the factions will probably submit a name to be party president, and then the factions will get together and try to decide among themselves who they're going to support. So you'll see alliances between the factions. So you'll see coalitions formed among the factions to get their person nominated as party president.
Let's see what the next move in Japanese politics. And it seems there is no challengers by anybody against Liberal Democratic Party. They are the only strongest party in Japan. So, by the way, suddenly Kishida resigned as Prime Minister. What will be Kishida legacy? At least he engaged with America, South Korea, trilateral Indo-Pacific strategy. Also, he did with Philippines and America, Japanese, three trilateral legacy. So during his prime minister, he promoted probably very good Indo-Pacific strategy. It will be more about military strategy and security strategy. But I don't see Kishida promote much about democracy in the region. He did not much support democratization in many countries in the region. Even they did not support humanitarian aid to the people in the region that will be eventually counted for democratization if you support a lot of funding to the crisis for the people. Like in Burmese military coup, over 3 years, Japanese are quiet and inactive for democratization in Burma, and they did not support humanitarian assistance very well, even though Japan is the strongest liberal democracy country in the region and economically powerful country, but it's totally quiet. So how you will be count on Kishida legacy?
That's a very good question, and you're very observant about what's happening. So it's Kishida. He was primarily focused on the United States and Europe, I believe, and the larger Indo-Pacific. So the Quad arrangements, but when it got to specific countries, as you mentioned, particularly in Southeast Asia and the like, he yeah, I think he was lacking. He didn't travel as much as his predecessor, or before that, Mr. Abe. His immediate predecessor, Mr. Suga, was kind of overwhelmed with dealing with the COVID response. Um, Kishida was supposed to visit Central Asia, Kazakhstan, and other countries this week, or I'm sorry, last week. But there was a large earthquake in Japan, and he called off that trip, um, which I can understand, but it removes some of the momentum for Japan's engagement with both regions and individual countries. Um, on the positive side, he did help bridge the gap with South Korea, which is very important for Japan and the region. Um, Many people within Japan feel he was too subservient to the United States. And on many domestic issues, uh, he he took too far into consideration U.S. views. In general, I would say he's extremely or very unpopular within Japan itself, but in the foreign policy establishment and some circles, he he remains popular. Um, he didn't have a strong domestic constituent, so he was basically put in place as prime minister rather than really earning it on his own. And because of that, he never developed the strong support or popularity that other prime ministers have gotten in the past, because they kind of earned getting that position.
Right. You know, that's reason his unpopularity in domestic is probably is a lack of, promoting democracy, supporting democracy inside Japan. Also, as I mentioned, he failed for promoting democracy in the region. Most Western countries, America and Europe, trusted Japan and those strong democracy country in the region to lead and promote democracy in the region, but they failed by uh, uh, Kishida
Hmm.
under Kishida government, as I
Hmm.
said in Burmese case, Kishida government keep quiet, you know, it's mean that in the vacuum of democracy activity, democracy leadership in the region, the communist China is moved in and authoritarian are more active in the region because of the absence of democratic country activity. Isn't that
Yeah, I agree with your assessment. Um, Japan tends to be quieter when it does things, and it believes in quiet diplomacy. Uh, and you could almost call it incrementalism, slowly, step by step. Um, Japan likes to build trust with individuals and with countries, and it tends to rely on that trust, even if the trust gets broken. And so they tend to do things out of the spotlight, quietly, behind the scenes. Um, uh, and that doesn't always match when a target country's domestic circumstances, or let's say the human rights of a of the people in a particular country are being uh, hurt or squashed much more quickly than the wheels of Japanese foreign policy move. Plus, it certainly doesn't match the speed in which China operates, um, nor does it, um, nor is it flexible enough to deal with certain situations. In part because the legal framework in which Japan's foreign policy uh, is decided and implemented makes it very difficult for it to be flexible. If anything, it's reactive rather than proactive in a quick basis, whereas China doesn't have those restraints. So China's been able to make a lot of inroads in a lot of countries, throughout the region, particularly those that it's targeting for as part of its Belt and Road Initiative.
Right. So Kishida failed many people as expected, especially a strong relationship with ASEAN country, except for the Philippines, US, Japan triangle summit. That's mainly for part of Indo-Pacific strategy for maritime strategy. But Kishida failed in ASEAN country about democracy promoting and many other things, and other Asian country also. Kishida failed to do many things for liberal democratization compared to Abe. Abe was very active when he was prime minister. He engaged very proactively with ASEAN country, not just Abe. Even Abe's wife is very much, proactive, like humanitarian activity. He did a lot of, she did a lot of humanitarian work in the region, So that is different with Abe and Kishida.
Right. If I could comment there, so on two different levels. So I mentioned that I'm a political scientist, but my training is as a historian. And so I think it's premature. It's too early to say that Kishida failed, in part because we don't have access to all the conversations, all the documents that will highlight or explain what actually took place. So it would be, I think it's too early to say, clear out that he failed. I do agree with your point that he certainly wasn't as proactive as Prime Minister Abe appeared. But on that score, there are two things to keep in mind. Well, actually, many things to keep in mind. Prime Minister Abe was at a level that you'll only see maybe once in your lifetime or once in a generation. He has his family has a long history in politics. Prime Minister Abe's family. His grandfather was intimately connected, with the region, both as a government official as well as prime minister. His grandfather, Prime Minister Kishi, visited Southeast Asia in 1957 as prime minister. So, very close connections. Whereas Kishida didn't really have that legacy to draw on. So he was a much shallower individual compared to Abe, I think. But with that said, during Abe's second premiership from 2012 until 2020, his much of that time, his foreign minister was actually Mr. Kishida. So Kishida actually helped Abe lay the groundwork for some of the successes that Abe had. So I think it would be difficult to write off Kishida completely because he was involved earlier on. But you could also make the counter argument that then he had something to build on, and he should have, worked harder at it. I think he might say, in retrospect, that probably the Ukrainian war really threw his plans off, and that he probably had to devote much more time, energy, resources to that matter rather than things that he would have liked to have done himself.
We can see clearly the failure when we see the case in Burmese military coup, as I told you, over 3-year military coup. As expected, Japan, the leading biggest democracy country, liberal democracy, how they're supposed to actively support democratization and work with democratic group in Burma, but it's nowhere we can see Japanese activity significantly. And humanitarian aid, Japan is a developed country in the region, the only developed country, and as expected as developed country, they did no significant humanitarian assistance in Burma. So this is clearly we can see the failure in that case, But I agree, you said there are success of foreign policy because during Abe and he has experienced a lot of foreign minister work. At least his success like that Indo-Pacific strategy, we can say, like trilateral meeting and part of the strategy about maritime issue. It's security issue, but not about democracy. In the region, we are mainly now challenges between democracy and authoritarian, So in that case, we can see more clearly democracy is a failure in many countries, and Japan role under Kishida government is inactive. We can see that.
Yeah, I can understand your perspective on that very much so.
Did you follow Burmese military coup case, Robert?
Not closely, but I was in Burma in 2019.
I see.
And I had hopes for the country, and I was very saddened, after the coup and the events subsequently, the refugee crisis, and so I'm not an expert on Burma, but I try to follow as much as I can.
Right. So it's very unsatisfactory among Asian democracy country, their behavior respond to the Burmese military coup is very unsatisfactory by Asian democracy country, how their behavior, they supposed to actively and, very much strongly support, because Europe crisis, other crises are far from Asia. There are many big developed countries in Europe and America are good enough to support, but Asia is, not that Western country can support. That's why the region democracy country should deal very wisely, but it is very unsatisfactory so far we can see. And what about the relation with Taiwan and Japan? How Kishida role in Taiwan?
Very good. On your point about promoting democracy, can I ask or suggest that that you write a commentary, an op-ed about your views about Kishida's failure, and I will help you get it published in Japan, because that's a very important perspective, and then we can communicate. Yeah, so Japan and Taiwan don't have, as you know, formal government-to-government relations. So they have informal relations with liaison or representative offices in each other's countries. And there's an impression that Kishida is close to China, or closer to China than certainly Prime Minister Abe. So there was a strong concern that that China would gain the upper hand in relations vis-a-vis Japan and in the region. Within the LDP, the ruling party, and also some of the opposition parties, there are strong supporters of Taiwan. A bipartisan group just left Taipei last night, and they were having meetings with President Lai, Vice President Xiao, and the foreign minister and other scholars and officials in the capital city. The relationship, I think, between Taiwan and Japan continues to grow and deepen. Taiwan is investing more and more in Japan. They're developing semiconductor factories in Japan, and there's a number of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that Taiwan feels that Japan's economy and its innovation is declining, and therefore Taiwan wants to help Japan prosper again. There's a slight change in the relationship where Japan was teacher, Taiwan was student. Now in many areas, Taiwan's actually the teacher. And Japan needs to understand that it's behind in many areas, that it's kind of the student. So it's an interesting dynamic right now between the two countries. And I use the word country because Taiwan is a country, in my opinion. And it's one of the most prosperous democracies in the world. And it's one of the most open democracies. Certainly in Asia, it's the most open democracy. And it enjoys high rankings in many fields throughout the world. So Japan is increasingly appreciating the importance of Taiwan, and that'll continue, I think, in whoever succeeds Prime Minister Kishida, there's one individual, one of the potential candidates was part of the delegation that just came to Taipei. There's another person who's very strongly pro-Taiwan, who's also a candidate for prime minister, Ms. Sanae Takaichi. So Ms. Takaichi would love to visit Taiwan, but she's in the cabinet right now, and the government probably wouldn't give her permission to come right now. But once she's no longer a cabinet member, she's much more free to travel. So I think generally the relationships gotten stronger and stronger over this time, even during the Kishida administration.
Right. So as you said, the two country, Taiwan and Japan relationship, Japanese role, and many Asian democracy countries are more, their behavior is toward business, like they more doing business with China instead of Taiwan. If they willing to help more democracy, they might not behave for business first, they should aware democracy, but there are not many democracy country in Asia, right? We see, as you mentioned, the case, Taiwan, Japan, two country relations.
Right. The challenge for everyone is to be able to decouple its economy from China's. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any relations or any economic activity, but when China's the number one or number two trading partner for every single country, that means that it exerts a lot of influence over the business community,